بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على حبيب المصطفى وعلى آله وأصحابه وعلى من اتبع الهدى أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So inshallah, in this video I'll be discussing a very important issue related to purity in general, and that is to do with the continuous and unremitting discharge of impurity and wudhu. Now what tends to happen is that certain people, they ask a question in our Dawul Iftar, and it's very common. It's a very common question that there's an individual that either that because due to the problem of continuous passing of wind, for example, or due to the continuous flowing of blood, it's not possible for a person to do wudu and pray salah without the continuous discharge or without the continuous exiting of the impurity. So it's very difficult for them to complete wudu and then complete the performance of the salah without this impurity exiting the person's body. So what's the solution to this? So this is where the hukm of mazur comes in, an excused person. So we can go into the details of this in today's video, inshallah. So first of all, that what do we mean by unremitting discharge? In other words, that what do we mean by when it comes to continuous discharge is referring to those things that those impurity that breaks the wudu or breaks the salah. Those things that break the wudu as well as they break the salah. Because if the wudu is not intact, if the wudu is broken, then you cannot pray your salah. And if a person is able to perform wudu but they're not able to perform the salah due to the continuous discharge, then the salah is not valid. Then it leads to undue difficulty and haraj for a person to continuously perform the wudu all the time, and then repeat the salah over and over again. Because throughout the salah time we're only supposed to be reading salah once, right? Do wudu once and salah once, and that's it. But this person, due to this specific ailment or illness, they have to continuously repeat the wudu and continuously repeat the same salah over and over again. So there is some solution to this, as the fuqaha has mentioned. So what we mean by the continuous discharge of impurity is, for example, continuous discharge of urine. So these are some of the illnesses that people have. For example, continuous discharge of urine. So urine we don't refer to as continuous urine, but even small drops of urine. Blood, for example, abscess. So for example, if a person has just grown an abscess, for instance, on any part of their body, and once it's popped, then it just continues to the abscess just continues to exit, and it just doesn't stop. Or continuous passing of wind, for example. People do have an illness that where the wind just passes just all the time, and sometimes it can happen even without even feeling the air coming out, for example. Or for example, continued passing of stool. This is due to illnesses and so on. So continued passing of stool, this is where the discussion of a stoma bag comes in. I'm not going to talk about stoma bag in this video, but inshallah in another video I will be discussing the ruling of stoma bag and purity and salah. And if anybody is interested, we have a fatwa on this on our JK Fatwa website. Anyway, you can read it there. So some of the other causes, some of the reasons, and some of the of unremitting discharge. We talked about urine, blood, abscess, passing of wind, and sometimes continuous discharge of stool. Or it could be because of istihada. This is specifically related to women, dysfunctional bleeding. And it does happen that after a woman, when she's completed her periods, right, 10 days, for example, periods, then after the 10 days she may experience some continuous bleeding after that. So this is known as istihada, dysfunctional bleeding. The laws of purity still apply to her, but yet because of the continuous spotting of the discharge of the dysfunctional bleeding, she will have to then she falls into the hukm of mazur, and she has to apply the laws of mazur and so on. So what are the main causes? So why do these things happen in the first place? Continuous dropping of continuous dropping of urine, continuous discharge of blood, passing of wind. Why do they happen? Number one, it could be because of medical condition. Somebody's got a certain medical condition that's caused them to do this. One example could be is that I know a particular case that where there was an individual who had an operation done at the bowels, and because due to the operation of the bowels, it's affected their urine. So now they don't have no control over the urine. So the urine can just come out just like that, for example. Okay, so they're not able to withhold the urine even for a short moment. So it could be sometimes due to medical condition, operation, for example, in a specific area. Number two, for example, because due to general weakness to the body, so a person is generally weak, that he's not able to control themselves. Number three could be because of change in the bodily hormones for women. So this is, for example, specifically related to women, that woman, she has a problem continuously discharging of blood, even maybe after the completion of a periods, or it could be due to a specific injury. So for example, you suffered an injury, and you've suffered such a deep cut that the blood continuously to flow, etc. So there's many other causes to this, which I'm sure many of you can relate to. Well, however, what our main concern is, what's the ruling? What is the ruling related to wudu? So there's two things. One is related to wudu, and the other one is related to that if the clothes were to be stained all the time. So how do we deal with that? So I'm going to deal with them separately. So first of all, in regards to wudu and salah, the first thing to note is that if someone is ever suffering from any continuous discharge of impurity for the first time, then the first thing you should do is wait until it stops. That's the first thing you do. So if you start continuously bleeding, for example, or if a person begins to notice that there's constant drops of urine coming out, then the first thing you do is you wait until it stops. Once it stops and you're convinced that it's not going to come again, or the blood, for example, is sealed, it's not going to exit again, then just do your wudu and pray your salah, and that's it. Even if it means that you have to wait for it to stop until after the salah time. So even if it stops after the fard salah has expired, meaning the time has elapsed, then you just pray it as qada. So that's the first thumbs up rule you need to remember, is that you don't become a mazur straight away, but rather just initially wait until it stops. Once it stops and you're convinced, then you just pray your salah, whether it stops within the salah time or after the salah time, and you could just pray a qada. So this does not result in being qualified as a mazur straight away. So the question is then, when does a person become a mazur? So a mazur usually is referred to as an excused person. So I'm going to use the term mazur. When I use this term mazur, it means someone who is genuinely excused. So a person qualifies as a mazur, an excused person, if the unremitted or continuous discharge of impurity continues for the first time throughout the entire salah time, from beginning to the end, leaving no possible time to complete the wudu and the salah. So what does that mean? That the continuous discharge of impurity, as some of the examples I've given above, if it continues for the first time throughout the salah time, from the beginning to the end, leaving no possible scope for doing the wudu and completing the salah. If you're not able to do that, then you become a ma'zur. Now, when they say completing the salah, the scholars only mention is a person is not able to pray salah. But what does it mean by, does it refer to the fard or does it refer to the sunnah? To my understanding is, and Allah knows best, to my understanding is that which constitutes a complete salah. So when we pray salah, for example, we don't only read the fard, we read the sunnats as well, don't we? Sunnat mu'akkada and so on and so forth. Sunnat ghayr mu'akkada and nawafil, they are optional salahs, okay? Something you could read, something you don't have to read. But those are which one must read are the fard, the sunnat mu'akkada, in the case of Isha Salah, the witr as well. So here, when they say that complete salah is referring to the fard as well as the sunnat mu'akkada and the witr wajib in the case of Isha Salah. So this is something to remember. You don't become a mazur if the continuous discharge started halfway of the salah time. So let me demonstrate this through an example. Let's say Zohar Salah begins at 1 p.m. Zohar Salah begins at 1 p.m. and ends at 4 p.m. So 4 p.m. Zohar ends and Asr begins. So keep this in mind. 1 p.m. Zohar time starts and 4 p.m. Zohar time ends. Now a person, they have a problem of continuous discharge of impurity. Which starts from 1 p.m. or just before that and continues all the way till 4 p.m. leaving no scope, leaving no room or no time or no sufficient time to at least complete the wudu and to pray salah time. Because each time when you repeat the wudu, when you do wudu, or each time when you pray the salah, the discharge comes out. Yes, so it's really leaving no possible scope. That's when a person becomes a ma'zur. If, for example, hypothetically, in this same example, if a person, if the continuous discharge started at 2 p.m., so Zohar started at 1 o'clock, but the continuous discharge is started at 2 p.m., for example, and it continued all the way till 4 o'clock, then a person does not qualify as a ma'zur. Why? Is because it did not start from the beginning time. It did not elapse an entire complete salah time, because the initial 1 hour between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, that was enough time for the person to do wudu and perform the salah, right? So because of that, a person will not be considered as a mazur yet. Okay, so you don't become a mazur if the continuous discharge started halfway through the salat time. So just to bear in mind. So once a person now qualifies a mazur, as I mentioned, it continues from the first time, from the beginning to the end of any fard salat time. Once you qualify as a mazur, then the ruling is then the concession, the laws of concession apply. What are those laws of concession? That is that you just need to perform wudhu once before every salat time, and you don't need to repeat that wudhu until the expiry of the salat time. With that same wudhu, you can perform as many nawafils, you can perform as many sunnats, you can perform your fard salah, even despite the continuous discharge. So once a person qualifies the ruling of mazur, as I just mentioned above, then the ruling is they just need to perform wudhu once. Then despite the continuous discharge of the impurity, they do not need to repeat the wudu over and over again. They could just do the wudu once and pray salah, and during that time they can do as much read as much as salah, as much as nawafil as possible. If they want to read Quran, touch the Quran, they can even do that as well. They don't have to repeat the wudu for every single individual salah that they perform. So let's say, for example, there's an individual that's performing the salah and they also perform the qada umri, but they are ma'zur. So once they perform the wudu, they just performed it once. They could read the salah of ada, the salah of that time, and they can also read their supplementary qadas at the same time without the need for repeating the wudu. And the ruling is that once the salah time expires, once the salah time, the fard salah time expires, only then the wudu will now automatically break. You will have to now renew the wudu, or any other breakers of wudu were to occur. So for example, if a person's got a problem with passing of wind, they're mazur because of that. But then a person bleeds, then obviously because of that blood, then the wudu breaks. Then they have to repeat the wudu. But just to remember though, for a person who's a mazur, that the wudu automatically breaks at the end, at the expiry of a fard salah time. Yes. So for example, in the case of zuhr, so once a person is become a mazur, then at the end of zuhr salah, then once asr time starts, because of the end of the zuhr time, the wudu automatically breaks. You have to renew the wudu for asr now. Once asr time finishes, the wudu automatically breaks. Then they have to renew the wudu for maghrib. Likewise for the other salahs. So this is the thing to remember. So this is the concession that's applied. Now once a person becomes a ma'zur, in order for the ma'zur ruling to maintain, in order for a person to maintain the rule of ma'zur, the discharge does not need to continue throughout the entire salah time after the first time. So this is a key point. A person qualifies as a ma'zur once the continuous discharge, it continues from the beginning to the end time of the fard salah time. That's only once. That doesn't need to be the same repeated thing in every single salah. So even if it was to occur even minimum once, that is sufficient for the excuse to remain intact. Because at times, when a person taking medication or they're eating healthy or whatever it may be, it's possible that that the illness, it may subside. So the illness subsiding does not affect the ruling. So even once a person becomes a ma'zur, even if that illness was to occur or was to repeat even once in any of the salah times or twice, then the ruling of ma'zur still remains, and a person just needs to do wudu once. Once the continuous discharge stops and doesn't occur even once during any of the salah time, then the concession of ma'zur is now uplifted. What that means is a person is no longer a ma'zur. Now they have to repeat the wudu each time that the discharge, each time when it emits, and if it continues again, then they have to go back to the original cycle again. So in short, to mention here, so just to summarize for this one shortly, is a ma'zur is a person that where the first time the illness, it continues throughout the entire fard salah time from beginning to the end, leaving no room for a person to do wudu or pray salah. Once a person fulfills this, then they remain as a ma'zur, even if the same illness doesn't continue in the following salah times by completing the entire salah time. Even if it were just to occur once, it is sufficient. Once the illness no longer occurs, not even once in any of the fard salah time, then the ruling of ma'zur now uplifts. And once a person is a ma'zur, the ruling is simple, that they just need to do wudu once. They don't need to repeat it, and they can perform as many salahs as they could throughout that time, and the wudu automatically breaks when the fard salah time expires. So that is related to wudu and tahara itself. Now, many people ask the question about clothes, that, you know, if a person is suffering from continuous discharge of blood, for example, or urine, then it stains the cloth. And what if, for example, a person is suffering from an abscess, for instance, right? And when they put a bandage, then, you know, the pus and the blood and the water that mixes, it goes onto the plaster. Then what do you do about that then? So the ruling is simple here, is that in the case of the cloth, then if it exceeds the equivalent amount of 50 pence or £2 coin, then it is necessary to wash. So the first thing is that when the cloth or the body becomes stained, then there is a minimal quantity that which now necessitates of washing that area. And what is that? That is if it's 50 pence coin and a £2 coin. So if it's just small drops, for example, if the small drops are urine, but it's not equivalent to the quantity of 50 pence or a £2 coin, then you don't need to wash it. You could pray salah in that way. But if it exceeds 50 pence or the £2 coin, now I'm saying 50 pence or £2 coin because there's no something definite here. Ulamas have just mentioned this, so I just mentioned both anyway because there's no significant difference between them. Then it is necessary to wash, but less than that you don't need to. If, however, due to the continuous discharge, it is not possible to wash that area that exceeds 50 pence or £2 coin, then pray salah, then washing will not be necessary. Again, you just need to wash it once for every salah time. It's the same ruling. However, once the discharge subsides, in other words, it decreases, and you're able to conveniently wash the stained area and pray salah, then washing it would be necessary. So this is the case that where a person is a mazur, but then the illness this time it subsides. It only occurs, you know, only once or twice in every salah time. But when it occurs, it is possible for the person to wash that area thoroughly. Then in that case, that area needs to be washed before the salah time. So remember that washing the affected area is necessary. You don't have to wash the entire clothes. So hope this was beneficial. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.